Have you ever been ignored? Have you ever been on the scene of an emergency incident, let's say a car accident, and there's people who need help, and you're doing your best and you're stepping in, and then the first responders arrive? Maybe it's a firefighter, a police officer, a paramedic, and they get out of their vehicle and they're approaching the scene, and you run up to them and you say, okay, there's this person in this car, and there's these two people over here, and she's really hurt, and you're given all this information, and they just kind of walk past you. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, there are people in our profession who can just be rude, or be stuck up or arrogant. But most of the time, that's not the case. And I want to explain to you today why sometimes first responders will ignore you, why they will ignore a bystander who's just trying to help. I'll use the example of a car accident. So when I'm arriving on scene as a firefighter to a car accident, there is so much information you're trying to take in all at once. And I also recognize that as a civilian, you're not trained to look for all of the things that I'm trained to look for. And in particular, you're not trained to look for the hazards that I am trained to look for. And as the professional arriving on the scene, I am responsible for myself, for my crew, and for the civilians, that no one else gets hurt. So if we take a look at that car accident, when I arrive on scene, the first thing I'm looking for is hazards such as power lines, right? We could have a motor vehicle accident where there's people very badly injured. But if one of those vehicles has taken out a hydro pole or parked on top of an electrical vault, that vehicle could be energized, and anyone who goes in to help could become a future victim. As soon as I arrive on scene, I'm now responsible for that. And I need to do my due diligence to make sure that good people who are trying to help are not also going to get themselves hurt or get themselves killed. Another thing that I'm looking for is I am looking to make sure that I have accounted for everyone who is involved. Again, a motor vehicle accident. You can have, let's say, a vehicle rolled over in a ditch, and a bystander is driving by. He sees this vehicle rolled over in the ditch, and he stops and he tries to help. What he may not have seen and what he may not have identified is what kind of damages to that vehicle. Are we seeing damage to that vehicle that could indicate that there's maybe a second vehicle involved? And so when I'm getting out, I'm often looking away from the accident because I need to do a survey. Again, it's my responsibility. If I go to an accident and there's a two-car MVI, two vehicles are involved, and I only see one and I only help half the patients, that's on me. What about when we get closer to the vehicle? Maybe a bystander has said, hey, you know what, this individual is really hurt, or this person in the back seat is screaming, they're in a lot of pain. Well, again, I'm the one who has to take responsibility for who receives medical attention and in what order. Just because someone is loud and vocal and screaming that they're in a lot of pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the individual who is hurt the most badly, that they are the most serious patient in that call. Often, people who are in a lot of pain and screaming really loud, they can be badly injured, but it's not often life critical right in the moment. It's the person who has a decreased level of consciousness, who's not talking, who perhaps is bleeding out and is losing consciousness or is becoming faint. Those type of people can be easily ignored on an emergency incident because they're not the ones making all the noise. So I wanted to explain that to you, that when a first responder arrives on scene and they seem to ignore you, I want you to know that we're not ignoring you. We're not ignoring the information that you're giving us. If I step out of the fire truck and you say, hey, there's two people in this vehicle and they're injured, and there's one person in that vehicle, he's not injured. If I go, okay, thank you, and then I walk right past you and I walk away from the car accident, or I start looking in the other direction, I'm not ignoring the information you've just given me. I'm very appreciative for that, because that's a data point that I need to remember. But I need you to know that those are not the only data points that I need to take in. As the professional on scene, I'm the one responsible for making sure that there's no hazards that people haven't seen, for making sure that there's no vehicles or victims or patients that have been missed by people, good, well-intentioned people who are just trying to help. But we can all be moth to the flame, focusing on the loudest patient, focusing on the most obvious hazard, and we can miss something. It's similar to a doctor. Let's say you go to your doctor and you say, hey, I've been having these terrible headaches, these migraine headaches for a couple of months now. I need you to prescribe for me a really strong painkiller. Well, a good doctor is not just going to simply prescribe a painkiller. They're going to do some investigation. And perhaps they find maybe you have something way more serious than a migraine headache. Maybe you have a brain tumor. That doctor, if he only prescribes you a painkiller and doesn't identify or treat your brain tumor, that's malpractice. And in a similar way, as a first responder, I can be derelict of my duties if all I do is simply take the first piece of information that is given to me and hone in on that alone. If I go only into the patient who's making the most amount of noise on a call, and I ignore the person who's been ejected from the vehicle in a rollover accident and is lying unconscious in the ditch, that's my fault. So I want you to know that we appreciate civilians and we appreciate the information we're given. And don't assume that we are ignoring you or that we don't consider your information or your help valuable when we arrive on a scene. But understand that there is more information that I need to make sure firsthand with my own eyes that I have ruled everything else out before I step in and help perhaps what is most obvious.